So welcome to part 2. So in this video we're going to be configuring the switch and router with very basic settings so that we can configure the phone system. This is going to be a very kind of in-depth video. Again, you're going to want basic knowledge of Cisco's iOS command line interface. It's not terribly difficult to get to grips with. You can just type all the commands that I'm going to type and you should get the same result, but knowledge of it will help at least a little bit. So be sure to watch part 1 if you haven't already. It will go over what sort of hardware you should buy and what sort of hardware I'm using, and this is kind of important because if you don't use the same hardware you're probably going to have some weird issues, and you're definitely going to have issues with licensing if you've gone and bought a newer router, and you're going to have issues with commands not existing if you've bought an older router, and if you've bought an old switch then you're going to have issues with certain phones not powering up. So watch that video just to recap on it. But without further ado, we're going to start by configuring a switch. So let's start by configuring the network switch. So the commands for this are actually going to be pretty damn simple because we just want this switch to be very basic on configuration so that it works on as many models as possible. I can't guarantee if this will work for a switch older than the 3560, which is what I'm running here. First command you're going to want to type is enable, or EN for short, and you should get a hashtag like that. If you don't, or you get a password box that you're not sure about, you'll have to reset the password through a thing called ROMmon. I'll leave a link in the description to Cisco's guide on that. It's not terribly difficult, but it's not a fun activity either. So I'm not going to record a video doing that. Luckily, this switch came blanked from the seller on eBay. If you're buying these used, just ask the seller if they could wipe the config. It's just so much easier if you can spend a little extra money and it gets to you with no passwords or anything. So we're then going to type conft to enter the configuration mode. So we're now going to create a VLAN for the voice network. So we just need to give it a number. So we're going to type VLAN and then a number. So for this example, I am going to be using VLAN 50. So there we go, VLAN 50, that could be between 2 and 255, and the reason you can't use 1 is because 1 is already created. It's kind of the default VLAN that everything is on by default. When you plug a computer in, it's on VLAN 1. When you plug your router in, it's going to default to VLAN 1. So we're going to use VLAN 50 just for the phones. So we're going to type VLAN 50, and as you can see it's gone into here, and we can then give it a name. So I'm going to call it VoIP, and that's all you have to do for the VLAN configuration. So type EX to exit back to the main page. So we're then going to need to set up a interface range. So this is where it kind of varies depending on your switch. The Cisco 3560 is only fast Ethernet 10100 basically. So we're going to do int, and I'm just going to do a question mark here, and as you can see a whole bunch of stuff comes up, but we're doing int range, and I think it's F0/0-F0-24. No, see, it don't like me. There we go, F0/1-24. So that's port 1 to 24. Yes, that's every port on the switch except for the 2 gigabit ports, and that's simply because I highly doubt anyone watching this video has the SFP modules to use them. Or if you've got a 3550, it'd be a twin gig, I think it's called, or something, twin X, really big module about the size of Montana. But we're in the IF range now, so we're going to do switch port, and then we're going to do the question mark, switch port voice VLAN 50, I believe. There we go. That's our configuration done. Yes, so I'll put the abbreviated command list on the screen right now. So I'm pretty sure I can recite it off the top of my head though. Enable conft VLAN 50 name VoIP EX int f0/1-24 switch port voice VLAN 50. We then want to obviously exit twice. Oh, apparently we can't exit with the shorthand exit. You can see configured from console by console, and we're then going to type WR, which will save that configuration in the switch, so it will not disappear when you restart. And there we go. So one of the things that we haven't done is we haven't given the switch an IP address, so you won't be able to access it through like Telnet or SSH. But really, we shouldn't ever need to do that. The configuration is basically done. This is a config that will last for eternity. Yeah. So now we need to configure our router, and I am extremely sorry for the high-pitched noise you may be able to hear in the background. The Cisco 2801 is probably the loudest thing on the earth, and that's even after I've unplugged fan 2. So I might have to get some Noctua fans or something and fan mod that, because oh boy, that thing's loud. The 2821 is what I recommend. It's so simple to fan mod, and it is dead silent. Like literally, I can't hear the thing. The 3560 and the 2801 are probably the two loudest things I have, although the 3560 is not the loudest switch I have. Anyway, let's move on, and you'll just have to ignore these fan 2 service errors. So we're going to press enter and get to our console and type en for enable. As you can see, we're in. Again, same problem with the switch. If you have a password here, you probably want to reset that and clear the config as well. So you can clear the config by just typing clear configuration. Now the reason you want to clear the config is because you may have erroneous configs in there. With a switch it's not so bad because you basically you're going to overwrite anything major. With a router it could be configured to have 40 freaking phones on it already, or it might have been configured to do dial-up internet or something, or ADSL, and obviously all of that's going to interfere with our actual config here. So let's actually get into config mode then. Conf T. So the first thing we want to do is we want to set up our interface. So them errors are really annoying, aren't they? Yep. Let's see if I can actually... That should work. Because I don't think it would be a critical condition. Is it critical? Emergency. Yeah, it's not an emergency situation. The system's still going to work without that fan. So there you go. That's how you disable fan service errors. That doesn't mean that you should leave the switch running with fan errors. So now that I've actually stopped the thing complaining to me, we need to give this thing an IP address in our normal network. So if you remember, we connected port 00 to the switch, which then goes to our normal home network. We want to configure the router so it automatically grabs an IP so that it can basically connect to the internet, so that you can use a SIP service to dial in and out, and it just works best this way. So we're going to do int fa0/0. If you've got a 2821 or 2851, this will be GE or G, I think it would be G00, like that. We have a 2801, so we have fa00. We're then going to do IP address DHCP, like so. What that's going to do is it's going to say, "Oi router, pick up an IP automatically," and this is fantastic because it's automatically going to set up all the routes and everything. It's just going to work perfectly. So we're going to go here and we're going to do no shutdown. And if you, well, you're not going to see the log because I've disabled the login, but it's going to grab an IP now. So if we Control C to exit back to the main line, type WR to write that config, we can then do show IP interface fa00. And as you can see, a bunch of crud has come up. It's not, doesn't seem to have an IP yet. Okay, so we're not getting an IP at the moment. I think that's probably because of my actual, there's an issue with my actual network. Yeah, there's a problem with either a switch or a router, and I haven't really had the time to figure it out. New devices have a major hard time connecting. But life will move on. We don't need the internet anyway. Actually, we sort of do, but we know that this is going to work anyway, so we don't really need to care about that. That's the config done. It will probably grab an IP. So we now are actually going to check our iOS version to see if we need to update it. So to do that, do shver. You'll get a bunch of crap come up, but what you care about here is system image file. And we can see that this is a C2801. There you go, Cisco 2801. And here, Advanced Enterprise K9. So let's break this down. Advanced Enterprise is one of the higher tiers. I think it does voice and a bunch of other stuff alongside voice if you really want. It's kind of one of the highest tier packages you can get. K9 just means that it's got cryptography in it, which means it could do SSH if you need to, or even probably VPNs. I don't care about that. And then at the end here we have the version here. So you really want this to be 151. That's for iOS 15.1, which is kind of the highest you can put on a G1 router. And then at the end here, this M3, that means it's kind of like revision 3 of 151-4, which is the version. I think they're on M12A is the last version. So ideally run the highest you can get. I can't be bothered to replace this. This is what the router came with, and it's going to work just fine. In fact, you could configure this with iOS 12.4 if you really want, but I really do not recommend that. It's got quite a few security issues around it. So Control C to exit out of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up our VLAN for the IP phones. So we're going to do conf t again, and this is where it's kind of different to the network switch. We're going to do int fa00 or g00 if you've got a 2821 or higher, and we're going to do a dot, and then we're going to type 50. Now if you remember, we did VLAN 50 for the voice VLAN. As you can see, it's now in sub-interface mode. So we're going to type encapsulation .1q, and yeah, just type VLAN ID 50. There you go. So we then need to give it an IP address. So we'll go type IP address 172.50.16.1. Now that's an IP address that I know no one, yes, and I mean no one in a home environment is going to be using. I've seen very few networks actually use the 172 IP range. 172.50 is technically out of specification for private IP addresses, but I don't give a crap because I'm just going to type that anyway. So that's an IP that I can guarantee no one's going to be using. We then need to type a subnet mask of 255.255.255.0, which basically gives you 250 IP addresses. That's plenty, because if you think about it, you'd need 250 different IP phones to use all that space. In fact, more like 254. So, brilliant. We're then going to give it a name, might as well. So, it turns out it's not called name on here, see, it's called description. We're going to give it a description of VoIP. That's just so it's easier to look at in the config. So, we can exit out of that, EX. We now need to set up DHCP so that when we plug a phone in, it automatically gets an IP from this router. So we're going to do IP DHCP pool, and then you need to give it a name. So you can call it anything, but it's probably best just to call it VoIP. We're then going to do address, is it network rather? Really? Which one of these is it? Tell me your secrets. I think I was right with network. Yeah, I was right with network. Blooming thing. There we go, network. 172.50.16.0 255.255.255.0, and that's that done. We now have set up DHCP. So now if you plug an IP phone into the switch and wait for it to boot up and go to the settings, go to network configuration and scroll down, the operational VLAN should be 50. If you go up to the top, select IPv4 configuration, it should have an IP of 172.50.16.2. because 1 is taken by the router. Now while we're here, we're actually going to go back into that DHCP pool, and we're going to set a few things here that we need to do for the VoIP to work. We're going to do option 150 IP and then 172.50.16.1. So yes, option 150, what does that do? Basically, DHCP has a way of giving parameters to connected devices. Option 150 sets a TFTP IP address, which the Cisco IP phones will find as the router. Basically, you're associating any plugged in phone with this router, because you could do DHCP on a different router. So we obviously got to type that, and we're also going to type default router 172.50.16.1. that way the phones could, if they really wanted, access the internet. Might be worth putting a DNS server in here, like Google's DNS server there, so the phones can also, if needed, convert like google.com, because you can do like custom XML services, which is kind of cool to look at the weather and stuff, and obviously they're going to need the internet for that. So I will put up all the commands that we've typed so far on the screen now. It's not that complicated, I'm going to be honest.
So here is the temporary VoIP setup. It is literally sitting on my bed here. We have the Cisco 2801 and the 3560 PoE24, otherwise known as 3560-24PS here. So I guess I might as well go ahead and show you how this is all hooked up. So we have port 24 here is hooked up to the router on port FA00 there on the bottom. Oh, I can't see that there. This blue cable's a really long console cable to my desktop, and port 2 on the switch is going to my normal network here, over there. I would have used port 1 or port 23 actually, but it wouldn't reach to port 23, and port 1's dead, so it doesn't really matter which port you plug it into though. And we have successfully just finished setting up the router with basic config for DHCP, and we have obviously configured this switch for handing out VLANs. So I have an IP phone here and a network cable, so let's plug it in. Come on. Now we haven't put any of the phone firmware on the router, so if your phone's running SIP firmware, it will boot into the SIP firmware, and some of this may or may not work as intended. And if your phone is running old skinny firmware, as it's known, it will probably have trouble updating, but we'll get to that when we actually put the firmware on the router, which will probably be in the next video, which is going to be a big long one where I configure, well, the basic VoIP setup, and we'll connect our first phone, which will probably be this one. So yeah, we're just going to wait for the phone to boot up. I recommend that you do this step with a 7911 or 7941 or 7961, anything that's X1, X2 or X5 as I'm going to call them, simply because the 7960s are known to have issues. So as you can see, it's got to registering, which is not what we had before, which was configuring IP. So we go into here, settings. First thing we're going to do is go scroll down to, it's really hard to see through the camera, network configuration there. I'm going to scroll down, and operational VLAN is 50. Brilliant. This is successfully obtained the correct VLAN from the switch. We're going to go into IPv4 configuration, and there you go, it has got a successful IP. Let's come out of here and go into device configuration, would it be? Unified CallManager 1, and okay, it's not got the correct CallManager IP yet. Let's go back to network configuration. Let's see if it's got the TFTP server set up in there. It'll be an IPv4 configuration, won't it? It's got the default router in there. There's our DNS server that we configured, and yeah, TFTP. That's DHCP. Where's TFTP? Oh yeah, it has got a DHCP server, correct. So our DHCP is working correctly. It's stuck on registering because the router is A, not advertising any firmware for the phone, and B, it's not actually running any VoIP services, so the phone can't possibly connect even if it had firmware on there. So yes, this is where you should be at this stage. Every phone you plug in should get stuck on registering. 7960s will probably get even more stuck. They'll probably get stuck on configuring IP, because I found they do not automatically get the VLAN from the switch. No idea why. I have a 7960 literally behind me on the wall. It doesn't get the IP from the switch, or VLAN from the switch. You have to manually configure it. Come on, camera, focus. There we go. So there's our little setup so far. It's really annoying when they don't line up. So I guess you have to wait for the next video. In the next video we will be setting up basic VoIP services, which is basically we're going to add a couple of phones, we're going to add the firmware to the phones, and we will hopefully be doing a call between two phones. Yes, that's all in the next video. So yeah. So prerequisites for the next video, you probably want to go download TFTP D32 for your computer. If you're using a Mac or Linux, then you're on your own, because I don't know of any good GUI based TFTP servers for them. And you're going to need, what else will you need? Probably want to go ahead and get two phones prepared for this. We're going to be starting with a 7911 and a 7906 around here somewhere, but the steps are very similar for every phone. I will go through the steps to setting up a 7960, but not in the next video, simply because they're slightly different and really annoying to work with. But I might as well demonstrate it, because everyone's going to ignore my advice of don't buy the 7960, because that's what everyone does. Everyone ignores my advice. Anyway, see you in the next video.